Okay, well, moving along, our next presenter is Steve Brushey, no stranger to longtime members of the CAA. Steve is a regional avalanche forecaster for the Ministry of Transportation with their Northwest Avalanche Program in Terrace. He's also the chair of the CAA's Explosives Advisory Committee, and a darn good one at that. So he's going to talk about the unexpected occurrence, and much better for him to talk about it than me. So Steve, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Can you guys see my screen okay?
All queued up with Charlie Brown looking at the stars.
Perfect. Well, this is my spring 2020 virtual presentation, and I must say, Bald is not only beautiful, but it's also very convenient given current conditions. So before I begin, I just want to recognize my employer, the British Columbia Ministry of Transportation Snow Avalanche Program, that I've been fortunate to be a part of for the majority of my career. The provincial program consists of 8 unique avalanche programs strategically located across the province of British Columbia that continually strive to improve highway reliability and provide safety to the traveling public. So in my time as an avalanche worker, I've been privy to a lot of different conversations from folks like Clarence Relison, Chris Stethan, Bruce Jameson, Phil Hine, just to name a few people, about those out of the blue, unexpected natural avalanche events that might occur once in your career. So this is our story, in particular, my experience about such a time 2 years ago. So it took place at Snowbound Creek on Highway 16 West between Terrace and Prince Rupert on February 27th, 2018. So my presentation is not so much about a large avalanche, there's a bit more to it, it's more of a high level approach. And I like the focus to be around what took place and how our avalanche program has evolved since then in the last 2 years, and a lot has changed. And it's also about some of the lessons we've learned along the way. So before I begin, I'll talk a bit about our avalanche program. We're responsible for an area from Prince Rupert to Smithers on Highway 16, the Nass Valley, Highway 113, Greenville Concolith, Highway 37 North, with an area around Belle-Two, Nigginsaw Pass, Dees Lake, Telegraph Creek, and Cassiar area, which is just south of the Yukon border. There's a crew of 2 full-time employees, so myself and Scott Garvin, and we hire 1 seasonal auxiliary. And last winter, we're fortunate to have a fellow from Castle Mountain Resort join us by the name of Mitch Suliak. All 3 of us are based in Terrace. We have a very proactive avalanche control program. We're blessed with 12 nearest neighbors in the InfoX that we share information with. And interestingly enough, we turned 45 years old this year. Our program was started as a result of the North Route Cafe accident that took place on Highway 16 in 1974. I never thought my career would be defined by a 400-meter rock slab, but yeah, it has been. It's our biggest program challenge. It's called 35 Mile. I've talked about it lots. It's characterized by really poor sight lines for the highway. The highway's on CN right-of-way, which poses its own challenges. And we have the Skeena River just on the other side of the highway. It also is responsible for our highest closure times, with 80% of our closure for our entire area. It's challenged by numerous small avalanches that directly affect the highway. You can see from the photo on the screen that there's a significant icefall hazard as well. It's a challenging location to do control work. We used to case charge there, but about 12 years ago, we decided, you know what, it's not worth it. We weren't getting the results, and the exposure to overhead hazard was significant. So we bailed on it, and it's been primarily helicopter control work until this year, and that's changed. It's incredibly resource dependent for both the maintenance contractor in terms of equipment, personnel, and traffic control. And when we're on an elevated hazard for our program, we have to have someone on site to implement site safety, specific safety measures 24/7. So it's a resource drain. So some of the details, well, you know, in December of 2017, we started that winter. We had our first closure, which is kind of rare, and it happened. And I thought, you know, this is weird. Is it a precursor to what's coming? Well, then things got real quiet, and January was cruisy, and you know, wasn't much going on. I thought, well, it's going to be a non-winter. Well, then February hit, and I won't just, so all this information I'm going to present to you in this next slide here. This came from our meteorologist and Simon Walker, a guy by name is Simon Walker in Victoria. And Simon said, you know, you guys were busy. Look at the amount of snow you got. So I won't dispute that fatigue was a legit concern for us. The month of February, we got 430 millimeters of water equivalent at Salvis, which is our highways elevation weather station. Which was resulted in 341% of normal snowpack, so it was a historical maximum HS at Salvis. At our Casix weather station at 700 meters ASL, we recorded 450 centimeters of storm snow. We were in the snow global there. It wasn't, we were just constantly busy. And up till this event on February 27th, the highway had now been closed for high avalanche hazard 4 times, and that was a lot more than normal. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Snowbound Creek. It's indicated by the blue arrow on your screen. And you see the path to climbers, right? Well, that's Snowbound East. It's a regular performer. It produces avalanches size 3 to 3.5 every 3 to 5 years that reached about mid-run out. It's on our radar. We're aware of it. We pay attention to it. Snowbound Creek, I admit, anecdotal evidence created a bias for myself that it was in our atlas, but you know what? I didn't consider it an avalanche path. It really didn't have the evidence that demonstrated that it reached the highway. And if you look at the slide, there wasn't much evidence to suggest that. It's your typical large coastal bowl. You know, slope angles in the start zone, average slope from our atlas, 25 degrees. So the path wasn't on our radar, and we honestly weren't paying attention to it. So the next slide sort of speaks to the change. You'll see the change after this avalanche. So what happened? Well, you know, February 27th was a really busy time out at 35 Mile, heavy snowfall. Scott Garvin had been out there all night. I came out around 6 in the morning. And we're trying to decide, well, can we weather the storm? Do we have to close, etc. Around 9 o'clock, we get a call on the radio, and the guy goes, a plow operator goes, hey, I've got about 15 to 20 centimeters of wet, sloppy snow on the highway. And I admit my first thought was, well, when was the last time you were out there with a plow truck? It's been snowing. And then he goes, and there's lots of branches, twigs, and it's real dirty. And I got to admit, my spidey senses started to tingle. So I looked over at Scott, and then I asked the plow truck operator, and his name was Jamie. And I go, Jamie, whereabouts are you? He goes, well, I'm just west of Casix. I go, well, no, where specifically are you? He goes, well, I just went across Snowbound Creek. And it was like, this doesn't make sense. So Scott and I hopped in the pickup, and we drove out there. And my prior career was in the forest industry, and I got to tell you, I came around the corner, and it smelled like a fresh logging operation. And it was one of those jaw-dropping moments where you went like, wow, now what? Well, it's pretty straightforward. In order to stay within our operational risks, we needed time to figure out what was going on. So we posted a high avalanche hazard and closed the highway. I got to add, as soon as you close the highway, the very next question you're going to get asked is, when's it going to open? It's a busy corridor. So we had a helicopter coming back from Bell 2 carrying explosives because we were running short in the terrace area. So I went back to terrace to get on that helicopter when it arrived. And I had some time, so when I got back to town, I picked up the phone and I called our nearest neighbor and said, hey guys, we just had something weird happen out west. It's big. I don't get it. We're not sure what's going on. Just a heads up. And it wasn't good enough to put it in the InfoX because that wasn't timely enough. It did get put in there, but they deserved a phone call. and it was midday for their operation, and they appreciated the heads up. So that was insightful. The outflow winds, meanwhile, picked up. So when I got in the helicopter, I flew out west and picked up Scott at 35 mile, and conditions were challenging. But we had enough time to look around. And during that flight, we were concerned with several outlier paths that normally don't do this sort of thing. But the good part about it was they either had defense structures or that highway was engineered that it was far enough down in the run out that if an event like Snowbound this size couldn't hit the highway, then we had a good degree of confidence that anything else from these other outliers wouldn't reach out. So, same time, the weather conditions improved, the snow had quit, and by 10 o'clock that night, the highway was reopened under an elevated avalanche hazard. So there's restrictions put on the maintenance contractor from the work they could do, and we maintained an overnight road patrol out there just to keep an eye on things. The next morning, we were going to do control work. We went out in a B-3 helicopter, but it was beyond ridiculous. Trying to fly lee side in these big start zones and poor visibility. We managed to get a few charges out, but we aborted. Flight conditions just pushed us outside acceptable limits, and we bailed. But we had a good look around, and that was beneficial. While we were out there, one of our outlier paths that we were wondering about produced a large avalanche that managed to take out 3 to 4 hectares of timber from the track, but it stopped mid-run out, well behind a defense structure. So that was good information. That was what we thought would happen. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Skeena, on a big north aspect, there's no highway over there, but there's a BC Hydro transmission line. An avalanche released there and took out a BC Hydro steel tower that effectively cut off power to Prince Rupert. So what about the avalanche? Well, it's a good time to talk about the avalanche characteristics. We had a look. Crown estimate was 2,200 meters in length. Maximum depth of the crown was 3 meters, and then average depth was roughly 1.5 meters. The air blast was significant, and the destructive power of that avalanche was impressive. There was a substantial amount of ground cover that was removed in the track right down to bare bedrock. The avalanche deposit itself was a mixture of soil, rocks, broken timber, root balls, and of course snow. Approximately 12 hectares of timber was damaged or removed from the avalanche. And we didn't do any dendrochronology, but I've lived up here for 30 years. And, we had to look around just judging, we always wonder how these big avalanche paths along the Skeena, like when did they happen? Because I haven't seen it. So we sort of estimate that this was likely a 1 in 100 year event. So since over the 2 years, we had a lot of time, and this snowbound event provided good opportunity to reflect and benefit from the experience to foster positive change. So there was some good stuff that came out of this. We didn't have to activate our rescue plan. No one got hurt. There was no damage to vehicles. So it was a really good and valuable learning experience for our program. So 2 years later, what's changed? Well, we've had a lot of change. We now we have a heightened awareness for our non-performers in the Skeena corridor. It's a really clear indication for us that Reason's model multi-layer approach to safety allows for events of this magnitude to happen and for a high reliability program to adjust and respond safely. The information exchange proved really valuable. Talking to our nearest neighbors, we were able to determine that This avalanche was actually a storm slab and not a basal instability. So storm slab healed a lot quicker, and that was very insightful and beneficial for us as well. Finally, snowbound path it's a year-round problem. So our program owns it in the winter, and around this time of year, maybe a little bit later, we hand it over to our MOT geotech as it's a geohazard. Due to the amount of ground cover that was removed from that avalanche, when we get these big coastal rainstorms in the summer and the fall, there's no ground cover to retain water. So we have higher stream flows and debris flows that affect both our CN rail and the highway right of way. So moving forward to where we are today, our program's better resourced for mitigating risk and improving crew safety at 35 Mile with 24/7 rack technology. Last summer, we installed 5 Oblex units. It was the first in Canada, and they really helped our program. The icefall hazard that you saw, we installed mesh netting there to mitigate that hazard. And as transportation corridors get busier, and it's busy up here, we have 10,000 man camp in Kitimat from LNG. The Rupert Port is incredibly busy. And as climates change, when we're seeing that, the Ministry of Transportation recognizes that adapting and responding to change is paramount in promoting a highly reliable transportation corridor. I'm pleased to announce that just last week, our program got funding for an avalanche detection system for one of our northern avalanche areas, remote areas on Highway 37 North, and we're tickled pink because that's going to be really helpful for us. Locally in Terrace here, our morning workflows continue to remain flexible to ensure a cognitive approach throughout the season. And, you know, all in all, Snowbound Creek was an insightful experience and a test piece on just how our program responded when that unexpected occurrence did take place in our career. So finally, I just want to add that since mid-March when the pandemic started, the world has changed, resulting in a high degree of uncertainty from a different type of unexpected event. So as we worked through this, where our program was still operational, I remember reaching out to Rupert with Parks Canada and Jasper and say, hey, how are you dealing with C-19 protocols? Like, how are you guys adapting? And his information helped us. So we have faith that the resiliency within the global avalanche community will adapt to this latest challenge. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks so much for listening. I'll open the floor now and hope you guys ask a lot of questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Steve. The first question I have is whether you put those aliens up there because they are also follicularly challenged.
No, I like that they didn't have any hair on their head. And I can relate to that.
Yeah. I know we've got a lot of search and rescue folks in the audience, so don't be bashful. I don't see any questions lighting up yet, unless you do. Oh, I think we got one there. Over to you, Brent, to manage questions.
Yes, we have a question from the floor from Dave Kavanaugh.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Hey, great presentation. I was just wondering, with the decreased ground cover you've seen at that Snowbound Creek, have you seen in the last couple years the avalanches that do start up there running further with the removed ground cover, or since it was such a big return event that maybe you just haven't seen large avalanches out of that feature again?
I don't think 2 years is enough time for that thing to perform, but the expectation now with that much surface roughness removed, that when these events, when they do take place again, then the potential for them to reach out, so the frequency will increase, yes.
Awesome, thanks.
Next question from the floor is from Grant Statham.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for your talk. That was really interesting. And my question is about all the new infrastructure that you're getting up there. You talked about your RACS program, 5 new Obelix. You're going to get avalanche detection this summer, which is great. So my question is, how are you adapting to that in terms of maintenance? We've been getting new infrastructure in Banff, and just trying to figure out how to fit the maintenance into our workload over the summer has been challenging. And I wonder if you guys are learning to be maintenance technicians yourself in the summer, or do you contract out? How do you handle the maintenance of all this new stuff?
Awesome question, Grant. You know, we're 2 full-time guys looking after a monster area, and so something had to change. It was challenging for us, and that's the main reason we went to the Obelix. I got to tell you, it was easy breezy. When we took those things off the mountain and brought them to terrace, it took 4 hours. And as I look out the window into our compound, the 5 of them are sitting there under shelter. All we had to do was put the gas bottles back in. So that was the main reason. So the upkeep to our infrastructure, fingers crossed, is really, really helpful. So excellent question, but that was the driving force of why we chose the Obelix over a different rack device.
Thank you.
And the next question from the floor is from Matt McDonald.
Yeah, good morning, Steve. Thanks for your talk. Super interesting to learn a bit more about your program up there. I'm just curious, like around the province, there's been a number of slope stability issues, mostly because of the big wildfire seasons there in 17 and 18. How do you guys, you know, you mentioned that you hand it over to geotechs when it comes kind of spring, summer, and fall for the big rain events. I'm just curious how they manage that hazard. Is it proactive closures when you see big atmospheric river type storms coming?
Excellent question. So not so much for Snowbound Creek. So it's a coastal drainage, and it can handle a lot of rain. That stream bed has been cleaned out. They've increased culvert capacity there. But over to your question, the wildfires in Telegraph Creek, which is one of our avalanche areas, with all the ground cover that was removed there and the waxing of the soils, when we see those big rain events coming, we do give the geotechs a heads up. Now, they haven't instigated any preventative closures. That's a tough one to do. And looking back at the Elephant Hill fire down in the Kamloops area, you know, when you see those big thunder cells come through and how quickly it rains so fast, what they're seeing is there's simply, and the intensity of how quickly those debris flows happen, there simply isn't enough time to close the highway. So that's a really good question. And the Ministry of Transportation, I mean, I'm aware of this, but it's a struggle that right now we couldn't close the highway fast enough. So, and that's the result of climate change and how the ministry realizes they have to adapt. So awesome question.
Yeah, and just a follow up to that, I mean, it's a big challenge, I think, for a lot of areas. I think of Ashcroft and Cache Creek there and Highway 99 down through there. And they did a pretty interesting program where they installed a bunch of tipping bucket rain gauges up and down the slope, and then they get automated alerts when they exceed, you know, 3-4 mils an hour for an hour or two. So yeah, some really interesting work being done on that front. But yeah, thanks for your answer.
Yeah, thank you. Great question.
Next question from the floor is from Kevin Marr.
Hey, Steve. Kevin Marr, Selkirk Snowcat Skiing. How are you doing?
Good to talk to you again, man.
Yeah, unexpected events, they occur, you know, unexpectedly, of course. And you're talking about looking at your outlier paths and so on. I'm wondering if your program or other control programs are treating outlying paths with low potential to hit the roads any differently.
Well, the different component of that, Kevin, and great question, is like I mentioned in my presentation. You know, when I started this years ago, I remember hearing from previous forecasters, "Oh, that never hits the road." Well, I got to tell you, I've had almost every avalanche path hit the road now, so they do happen. So it's just we have an increased awareness. If we have to go do control work there, we will. So it's a real balance. So our cognitive awareness has definitely highlighted the fact that every path's possible now. And so as these storms progress and as the weather patterns change, we may have to do more proactive control in them. So honestly, it's a season by season, and then that turns into a day by day assessment as conditions change. So awesome question.
Thank you.
Next question from the floor is from Dan Piscini.
Hey, Steve. Great presentation. I was wondering if on any of these paths that have avalanche potential and then summer geohazard potential, if you see any correlation between avalanche cycles and then follow up the next summer with more maintenance needed or more geohazards or less, or if there's any relationship between the two on any of the paths that you've seen.
Well, there's a definite relationship. So, you know, as landslides occur, and if they're within the highway corridor, our geotechs give us a heads up. And so we'll look at it and evaluate that, and like, does it have a potential? It definitely needs snow to be an avalanche path, so that depends on where it is. And you know, so there is a direct correlation. We work closely with the geotechs, but you know, it's what we're noticing is change happens fast, and it may be there, it may be not there today, but it's there tomorrow. And so just being ever present in the moment and being able to identify when that change happens, because that change is happening. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's kind of a higher level answer for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I was just wondering if, for planning purposes, if you could use events from one season to plan for the next.
You know what? 10 years ago you could have, but I think it's related to climate change, but things are changing too quickly. And because our program's so big and so dispersed, we're seeing that change take place across a big geographic area of the province. And so honestly, it almost seems like something every year is taking place, and it's tough to forecast for. So it's just a matter of being on your toes and accepting the fact that things are going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that great question, Dan. Thanks, Brent. Steve, we want to thank you for a great presentation. You've got a lot going on up there in Terrace, and a lot of good thoughts for highways folks and other folks involved in control to think about.
All right. Thanks a lot, Joe, and I appreciate the time.